I almost don't want to say it because like I know everyone's gonna start putting this in their beats, but like now let's talk about what's probably the most signature thing to his sound. Okay, so this 808 right here is like the go-to 808 that Ozzy uses in like practically all of his beats for Drake. Alright, what's good YouTube? Okay, so for those who don't know, OZ is one of my favorite producers to date. And for the last like 2 years or so, in terms of like actual amount of streams, OZ has probably been like the biggest like rap producer out there to date. TOOSIE Slide, Popstar, Grease, Girls Want Girls, and many other tracks. And the one thing they all have in common is this general formula that OZ has been following for the last 2 years, that in this tutorial, I'm gonna break down to you guys exactly and how you can make a beat that a guy like Drake would rap over. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is like VSTs. I've been watching a lot of like Instagram lives with OZ, and like one thing I've noticed with his beats when he makes them, he's really just using like the most bare bones like simple VSTs. The VST I saw him using more than any of them was Korg Triton. It's really just a great VST for like very generic sounds. It's almost like a purity in that sense. For his beats in particular, as you're gonna see, a big part of his sound is being able to manipulate very generic sounds with effects to make them sound completely different from what they actually are, and that's a big thing I'm gonna teach you in this tutorial. So yeah, Korg Triton is really good. Other VSTs, Expand is really good. There's some cool sounds you can find in Analog Lab, but really just like the factory ones, not the synths themselves. And this VST right here that I like to use a lot called M1, again, it's also Korg, so like in general just the Korg stuff is really good for these types of beats, and OZ uses these kind of things. As for the actual types of sounds he uses, bells, like organs, pads, keys, it's really not going to matter too much what the sound is. I just say go for stuff that isn't like insanely like loud, like overdone. Go for like soft sounds that aren't like too reverberated so we can't like make melodies with them. One thing I want to mention as well is that for these beats, generally the tempos tend to sit between like 160 and 160 like 6, let's say. That general range for tempos is like insanely popular now, and like I'd strongly recommend doing that. I like to do 163 just because by default I have my FL to open up to 163 BPM every time, so I'm used to it. And yeah, so anyway, what I did was I took this organ preset called Solo 5, and then I just took another preset called Bass and Organ, and I just laid down this super basic melody. I saw these like videos of like people talking about like how like for making these types of beats, oh, you gotta use like the specific, the 1 3 5 7 2 3 like progression, and it's like that's not a thing. The only thing you should be keeping in mind is that like in your head, like, oh, can Drake rap on something like this? Really just go for like sad kind of stuff, you know, like 2-note gaps in between, but it really depends on what you're doing. For this beat, what I did was I just laid down 2 very basic chord progressions like this, here and here, and then what I did to keep it sad was I added these like top notes right here to the beat. I was very selective with the notes because I was trying to do something sad for this beat, so I was trying to stick with the 2-note gap notes like this. So as you can see, when I pitch it down right here, you can see that there's exactly 2-note gaps between like each point in the track when the notes play, so that's going to give us that feel. And then finally I just laid down this root note. Like I literally just made it sound like the 808, like the way I wanted to hit, because I didn't want to like forget the pattern that I had in my mind, and I just ended up leaving it because I was like, oh, it sounds good. So yeah, I just laid down that melody. Only thing I did different was remove the root note in the second organ preset as well as the top end of it, and so without effects that melody sounds like this. Now that's sexy. But yeah, as I was saying, that's without effects, which again, this is the big part of the tutorial because we're going to manipulate the hell out of that sound, because after effects, we're left with something like this. I know it looks like a lot, and it is a lot, you know, it's the whole effect rack, but it doesn't really matter like how many effects you put onto it, so long as you're like not just blindly doing it like, oh, I need to put this on here because it's the rule, I gotta put this down, you know. But yeah, the overall goal with these types of sounds and with the effects is making our sounds as soft as possible. With OZ's melodies in general, there's like really no harsh sounds playing whatsoever, and I'm sure he's doing some sort of like emulation, modulation, configuration or whatever with the attack of the sounds so they're softer, but you can get that same effect by just like EQing out like specific harsh frequencies, adding things to just like spread out the frequencies more as like stereos, reverbs, as well as half times, stuff like this, just to like slow it down and remove the attack. Those are all just general tricks you can do that I like to do a lot. And yeah, I basically did that exact same thing with the second sound over here. So yeah, with all of that after the effects, it sounds like this. So what I have right here is a master EQ with nothing really like changing to it. Get like a glimpse of like what that looks like. That's the general look of what you want your melody to look like on like a master EQ with everything. You know, a lot of mids, but like no harsh frequencies and a lot of like spread in between them. One last thing I did was I just took this like FabFilter EQ right here, and I just like recorded this automation of me cutting out frequencies at certain points. So it plays along with the beat and cuts out at different points in the spectrum thing, whatever the hell it's called. I don't know what I'm doing. And yeah, as for melodic sound, sounds. Like what I did is I went to Electra X and just took this Roy Major Pluto ARP Trek preset, and I just added a bunch of crazy effects like this Echo Boy, parametric EQ, reverb, limited it a little bit to get rid of harsh sounds, as well as like an EQ like this, just to make the sound like super soft and have it like sit in the background. Again, you can barely notice it, but if I were to play the melodic sounds just by themselves, you're gonna hear it like this. And yeah, that's it for the melodic sounds. Now let's talk about what's probably the most signature thing to a sound, and that's the drums. I can't stress it enough. Like the formula to like all these beats for the drums are so simple and so similar. It's ridiculous. Okay, so this 808 right here is like the go-to 808 that Ozzy uses in like practically all of his beats for Drake. The 808 actually comes from my kit. It's called 808 Life, but the original 808, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, it's just called 808 Life is Good. I kind of borrowed it, but it's literally like the official 808 that he used for those beats. And yeah, it's a super good 808, and if you guys want it, you can get the link in the description, completely free. You know, it's on me. But yeah, even though I used like a little bit of a modified version that I made of that exact same 808 in this beat, I'm just gonna use this one just from scratch to show you like exactly like what this formula is. So as for the 808s, the 808 patterns he uses aren't like anything crazy. Just like do a generic simple 808 pattern, do whatever, you know. Even though this one that I made would actually use the clap, just want to like stick to a snare sound hitting the whole time and just like having like different gaps where it hits. Again, it's not like it needs to be something like, you know, I need to do this every single time, but I'm just saying generally for these types of beats, he doesn't really use claps all that often. He'll have like snare patterns that like hit like at different points. They're never really consistent, like they're not super repetitive, but they're still hitting at very generic points that like most snares are gonna hit. Again though, the snare called Snare God is Good, which is the Life is Good snare that he used for all of his beats. But yeah, the hi-hat, super generic, like cardiac hi-hats, very generic drum sounds in general, to be honest. I'm gonna say it for the millionth time now. If it works, it works. As for the hi-hat patterns, this is probably like the biggest signature thing that he does with all of his beats, is they usually just follow the structure of like, even though I didn't do it with this beat in particular, he just has the two-step hi-hats thing like this, and like somewhere like right around the end, like at this point, he'll just do like one roll that just hits, and it just kind of like switches up in the next part. So he might do something like this, I know is gonna work just like without even listening to it, and then maybe he'll do like, he'll do something like this maybe, and he'll just have that repeat. Like it's super basic, and this has just been like a wave that like people are like doing nowadays that's like really big, and I strongly recommend at least trying it in one of your beats. But yeah, he'll just have like that repeat like that, for example. So yeah, now I got the snare playing. I'm just gonna make a snare pattern with this. And yeah, after that you can just add drum sounds as you feel. Like what I did for the beat is I add this open hat like this. And yeah, with the 808, it sounds like this. Yeah, again, like I literally just made that pattern now. Like I didn't even listen to it. Like I didn't put any thought into it. I just knew that was gonna work because Ozzy has been doing this in like all his beats, and it's a formula, you know what I mean? As for final tips in terms of like mastering your beats, Ozzy doesn't like consistently do anything on his master, but he'll like occasionally like he'll put like a soft clipper. He might put an EQ on the high end. He might put like an L2 like limiter or something like that. He has like a bunch of things on his like master, but he tends to go back and like fix a lot of project files and kind of like tweak with things and take his time with them. So I'd advise you do the exact same thing as well. If you want to work on it later, just go do that later, because I don't know, Ozzy does that, so why not? But yeah, as for this beat, I just did a super basic like EQ like this that I've been putting on a lot of my beats. And yeah, that's basically it for this tutorial. I'm gonna let this beat play out at the very end for you guys to hear, but I really hope you guys learned something about like how Ozzy makes his beats. And yeah, that's basically it. Once again, link in the description if you want like the drum sounds that I used in this tutorial, completely free. Instagram, Twitter at FinnaFinesse. New videos every Chinese New Year's, and I'm out. Peace.